Hey guys, Matt Bell with the Electric Violin Shop. Good to see you. I want to let you know that I'm the guy who handles not only our YouTube videos like you're watching right now, but also our Instagram account. So if you're one of the roughly 26,000 people as of press time who follow us on Instagram, thank you very much. And so I'm the one who posts the pictures, answers the DMs, comments back on the comments, all that kind of stuff. And one of the most common comments that we get is whenever we post an instrument that's got more than 4 strings. People are freaking out. They have no idea what that is. Thank you to Two-Set for inspiring people to make the incredibly witty and creative comment, sacrilegious, every time they see something that's got more than 4 strings. I just delete most of those, by the way, because otherwise there'd be like 78 sacrilegious comments on every 5-string violin. I don't know why people still think we live in the 17th and 18th centuries. We don't. 21st century, we've got access to things that we didn't have in the 17 and 1800s. But let's not act like extended range violins are a new thing. They're not. They're an old thing made new again. It turns out in the 1600s, 5, 6, 7, 8-string bowed-stringed instruments were pretty common. Rachel Barton Pine has a 14-string viola da gamba that she let me play one time. The thing blew my mind because it had an F sharp string on it. It's tuned in open D. But the low D on that thing is low. The problem was, as evolution continued and venues started getting larger and larger, these large extended range acoustic instruments could not project loud enough to fill what then was a modern concert hall. So they had to shrink the bodies on these things. They had to shrink the range on them so that a more limited range instrument, the body could project all of those frequencies into the room. So they got away from these extended range instruments because they needed them to be louder for what then were much larger concert halls than what these older instruments had been designed for. Fast forward to the 20th century, we now have electricity. And we can amplify these instruments with a pickup. So all of a sudden, I don't have to depend on a small wooden body to amplify all these frequencies. I can use a pickup, which means I can go back to this old idea that the violin range, honestly, is pretty small. So we can start adding more strings back to these instruments, and with the help of a pickup and electricity, we can now go back to having these extended range instruments with huge ranges on these things. So violins are tuned in fourths, E-A-D-G, fourths, fifths. What am I talking about? It's a fourth if you go the other way. They're tuned in fifths. My head is in guitar land right now. They're tuned in fifths, E-A-D-G. So if we're going to add a low string, we add a low C following the circle of fifths. All of a sudden, a 5-string violin is a violin and a viola all in one. If we go down another string, that gives us an F. The 7-string violin will have a low B flat on it. They actually do make an 8-string violin, and it would have a what? An E flat string, a low E flat string. And when you pull that thing, like it shifts the orbit of the moon or something. It's really incredible. So that's what's going on with these extended range instruments. So everybody always asks, do you go down? Do you add strings to the high end? No, we don't generally add strings to the high end. E strings are screechy enough. If you're a violinist, you feel the pain of trying to find an E string that doesn't squawk at you. They actually do make a string above the E string. B strings with current string technology just tend to snap. So they make an A string that is a fourth above the high E, just in case you wanted to know. So now why would we do an extended range other than because we can? Well, because we can is not a bad answer. It also allows us to go after some of that old literature, the stuff that's 400 and 500 years old that was written for these old extended range instruments. The other thing is improvisers love having an extended range, especially in bands that are vocally driven bands. If you're playing a 4-string violin and you're trying to stay out of the range of the vocalist, you pretty much have to go up to get away from them. You start adding lower strings, you can actually go below the singers as well, and it just opens a lot of opportunities for you to do some playing. Now, what are some of the challenges of having an extended range instrument? Well, obviously we've got to put more strings on the instrument, so the necks are going to change size and shape. But really, more importantly, the necks tend to bother people a lot less than what the bow hand's going to do. Tracy Silverman actually said, you think you play the violin, you actually play the bow. The bow plays the violin. So let's focus more on the right hand, which, believe it or not, is the more important of the two hands. So as we start packing more and more strings onto a bridge, the bridge can only get so big because your left hand is only so big. So we start seeing tighter string spacing and tighter angles. So I wanted to give, a lot of people ask that question, so I wanted to put some numbers. This is my engineering degree popping out. I wanted to put some numbers on some of these different dimensions that you have to deal with when you're doing an extended range instrument. So we're going to do a couple little experiments. Here is me in my home studio, and you can see me holding my acoustic violin there. I actually put a rubber band around the middle of the bow so that that portion of the bow would that's where I would put the bow on the string for this particular experiment. And then you can see we're going to measure from the very tip of my bow, of the frog, not the tip, the opposite of the tip, the bottom of the frog. And actually it's the little screw. We're going to measure from the screw to the floor in each of these little situations here. EADG strings on a 4, a 5, a 6, and a 7 string violin. Okay. The instruments that I used for this are my acoustic violin that you see in the picture there. I used one of my Glasser 5-string acoustic electric violins. I used my 6-string Viper with a Barbera on it, and then I used a Jordan 7 with a Starfish pickup on it. I realize these are all different instruments, so to some extent we are comparing apples and oranges, but I think you're going to see that the trends here sort of really show you what's going on. So we have a 4-string, a 5-string, a 6-string, and a 7-string violin. Now, these numbers are kind of small. It's a chart. If you're not a chart person, I'll talk you through this. You can see across the top, we've got 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are the instruments, and then EADG. So we're measuring this. These are the measurements in inches from the end of my bow. When I put the bow on the string of the instrument, and I had a marker on the bow, so it was always in the same place, how far was the end of my bow from the floor in each one of these situations? Okay, so you can see on the 4-string violin, when my bow is on the E string, and what I sort of felt was sort of the middle of the E string, we're 49 inches from the floor. And then when I go to the A string, I'm now 52.5 inches from the floor, 56 inches, 59.5 inches to get to my G string. Okay, so you can see that the average delta, engineering term, the average difference between those is about 3.5 inches. So to get from one string to another on a 4-string violin with, bow contact in the middle of the bow, I'm going to raise my right arm about 3.5 inches. Okay. When we did this with my Glasser violin, the average delta was about 2.5 inches. Same thing on my 6-string Viper, about 2.5 inches. And then you can see the deal on the 7-string, and I don't know why my little thing's in front of that. Whoop, 1.8 inches. All right, sorry. So for a 4-string, I've got about 3.5 inches of moving my arm to get to each string. For a 5 and 6 string, it's about 2.5 inches. It's a little bit tighter. For the 7-string, it's even less. It's less than 2 inches. Now that feels like a lot, but believe it or not, here's the 7-string in my hand right now. Let's come back to here so you can see. It's not that, this is a relatively easy thing to do. So it's not like it's that tight, but you've got to be about twice as accurate on a 7-string as you do on a 4-string. Well, that makes sense. It's almost twice as many strings, right? What was really interesting to me is that the 5 and the 6 were roughly the same. And it's not a thing that I had ever put a number to, but it's about what I experienced. When I went from a 5-string to a 6-string, I felt like it was about equally playable, honestly. So that's measurement number 1. How high do I have to move my arm to get from one string to another? Well, I thought, well, gosh, certainly we can measure more things than that. So let's look at these bridges on these instruments. I actually bought a little device that allows me, it's a digital angle measurer, and I meant to bring it in, but I left it at home. My kids are probably shooting each other with it right now. So I was able to lay the thing across the D and G string on each of these instruments and then measure the angle from that line created by D and G to the line created by D and A on each of these. Does that make sense? Because all 4 of these violins have a D, a G, and an A string. So I figured that was going to be a fair comparison, that you can see the angle difference between G and D and D and A. D and A? What? So here we go. On a 4-string, on my particular 4-string, that was an 18-degree angle between touching D and G and touching D and A. On the 5-string and 6-string, pretty close, around 16.5 degrees. On the 7-string, about 15.5 degrees. So a little bit tighter, a couple of degrees tighter. And that sort of makes sense when you think about how much you're going to be raising your arm to get from one string to another. The next thing we measured was the distance from the outside of the A string to the outside of the E string on all 4 of these instruments. And I measured that not just at the bridge, as I show in the picture here, but also at the nut, so you can get an idea of what are string spacings that I'm going to be dealing with, not only with my right hand, but also with my left hand. And these are the measurements here. And you can see this is actually a little surprising, believe it or not, that on the 4-string violin, I'm about 6.1 millimeters from the outside of the A string to the outside of the E. And then, they're actually just a little bit under 6 millimeters on the 5, 6, and the 7. Jordan tends to make his necks a little bit wider. So again, we're not talking about an apples to apples comparison here, but this is just going to give you an idea of a rather representative 7-string. And then at the bridge, you will actually see the differences are not that great. On the 4-string, we're looking about 11 millimeters from the outside of the A to the outside of the E. Well, about 11 on the 5-string, about 10 millimeters on the 6-string, and we're back to 11 millimeters on the 7-string. So, if you want to say, wow, gosh, that 6-string is way tighter, it's a whole millimeter, guys. It's, like, what's a millimeter? Millimeter's super tiny. So I just sort of wanted to let you see some numbers and see, gosh, what are we talking about? What are some of the challenges of going to an extended range instrument? Well, it takes a little time. The first thing is when you're looking down the neck of an instrument, especially if you go to a 5, you're like, holy cow, there's a middle string, and it can mess with your head a little bit. One of the things I encourage people to do, that if you're sort of new to this and looking down the neck of the thing confuses you, don't look down the neck of the thing. Believe it or not, your body, when you're playing, if you've been a player for very long at all, if you're playing and you're hearing an A, your body's just kind of intuitively going to know what to do to get to that next string. Believe it or not, if you don't look down the neck, you may find yourself a little less confused. One of the other challenges that I've experienced going when I play a 6-string or a 7-string is that when I'm playing on those top 4 strings, I don't have to think at all. I'm going to play an F, doom. That's second finger on the D string. I know that intuitively because I've been doing it my whole life. When you go to a 5-string violin, you're thinking F, below the G string, third finger on the C. Sometimes it takes just an instant and it feels like an eternity, especially if you're used to these things being instantaneous. If it takes a half a second to remember, oh, that's third finger on the C string, it feels like a really long time. I generally find within a couple hours of playing the instrument, those things start to come pretty fast. I would say within 8 to 10 hours. And some of you, that's only a day. If you're 2-set fans, you ought to be ling-linging this thing. 40 hours a day. Gosh, that's only a quarter of a day. You have this thing figured out. So the other challenge is where to find repertoire. People will say, well, I've got this 5-string violin. What music should I play? If you're not an improviser and you are looking for repertoire for an extended range violin, be aware that there is a fair amount of repertoire out there. I actually have written a piece for 5-string unaccompanied violin. If you will look up the repertoire for 5-string violins, there's a lot of it. There's a whole lot of it. And there's starting to become more and more repertoire written for 6- and 7-string violins. It's out there. One of the issues is you may have to start reading in other clefs. When you start writing for 6-string or 7-string violin, gosh, we're used to seeing a lot of staff lines above the staff if you're a first violinist. But we're not used to seeing a lot of lines below the staff. Like we see 2 for an open G and we're like, okay, that's kind of all I got. We could either just put a bunch of staff lines below, which is what I used to do, or you could start using alto clef, which means all of a sudden the violists are going to start smacking you around on reading music. Or you can use bass clef, either or both. I've seen both of those done. So that is another challenge. If you're not used to reading alto or bass clef, it could take you a second to get your mind around that. If I can do it, anybody can do it. It takes a little bit of time. So the next thing is, what is the risk versus reward, right? I'm going to make a change. So there's some risk associated with this, but what is the potential reward? Well, if you're buying from us, which you should, if you're buying from us, we have a 30-day return policy. So if you're thinking, man, I really would like to try out a 5-string violin, but I just don't know if I can do it, buy it. Worst case is you play it for 2 weeks, you go, man, yeah, I'm just not getting this. Send it back. We're cool. Not yell at you or anything. We may secretly be disappointed, but we won't yell. So, and I'll actually say that probably 90% or more of the people who really want to get into extended range, they'll get a 5-string or 6-string and they're like, yeah, I got this. They can, probably 90% or more of the people who try it, they get it. It's a fairly small percentage of people are like, man, I really tried and I can't do it. It's cool. We get it. It's fine. Send the instrument back. The reward is that you can make sounds that you couldn't make before. And that's what music is about, is expressing emotions and making sounds. And the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more expressive you can be. And then the other thing is that you've got the convenience of 2 or 3 instruments in one. A violin and a viola all in one instrument? You kidding me? This is nice. I can take viola gigs. I can take violin gigs. Nice. If you're teaching, you can be teaching the violinist and the violist at the same time. You don't have to grab another instrument. And if you throw in an octave pedal, all of a sudden you can cover cello range too. So you've got violin, viola, cello all in one instrument. So that's sort of what the potential rewards are there for you. So if you have more questions about extended range instruments, feel free to shoot us an email, info@electricviolinshop.com. You can comment below. We monitor this YouTube page, and if you got questions, we can help you out there. Or you can hit us up on any of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. All right, so thank you guys for watching. Go get you an extended range violin. Come on, it's the 21st century. You can do this.